We've got good news. Just spoke with Speaker McCarthy, and we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement that we're ready to move to the full Congress. And I think it's a really important step forward, And it takes the threat of catastrophic default off the table, protects our hard-earned and historic economic recovery. And the agreement also represents a compromise, which means no one got everything they want.
You heard it right there from the president, a compromise. The debt ceiling deal, policy provisions, which the House and the Senate Democrats were briefed on earlier this evening, include raising work requirements for federal aid, an increase to defense spending, and a rolling back of funding for the IRS. Now, here's my take on it. While it's a good thing that we didn't default on our debt, or that we're not going to, it seems, default on our debt, this agreement also isn't necessarily a win for the American people, certainly not for the poorest Americans. Personally, I can't cheer on a bill which makes it harder for the most vulnerable people in our society to access basic necessities, or one that could prevent the IRS from being able to effectively catch tax evaders. One that allows Republicans to set the terms of debate on spending. So, what does top progressive economist Robert Reich, public policy professor at the University of California at Berkeley and former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, what does he think about it all? Let's ask him. He joins me now. Bob, thanks for coming back on the show. In his remarks earlier this evening, President Biden framed this agreement as the only way forward and good for the American people and for the Democratic Party and his administration. Do you agree with him? Are you happy with this deal and the spending cuts that are involved?
No, Medhi, but I don't think that's the point. This is the deal. I mean, you don't have any. What the Republicans did is essentially subjected all of us, the entire nation, to being held hostage. And yes, this was the negotiation with the hostage takers. And the alternative is the entire system, both our political and economic system, mostly our economic system, blows up. What can you say about it? Well, the best thing that could be said about this deal is it's not as bad as it might have been. Yes. But it still has a lot of stuff that you just have to hold your nose to.
Yeah, well put. The United States, Bob, is one of only 2 countries in the world with a legal debt ceiling. The other one is Denmark, and Denmark sets it so high it's irrelevant. We were talking in the last hour about how this new agreement puts the debt ceiling off until 2025, but we assume it'll rear its ugly head again then, especially if Republicans control the House and the Senate in 2025. All of this is to say, isn't it time to get rid of the damn debt ceiling rather than just keep kicking the can down the road and allowing the GOP to use it as a hostage every 2 years?
Of course it is. And the fact that the Democrats couldn't do it when they had both houses of Congress, when they controlled both houses of Congress, is a pretty damning indictment of the Democrats and of Manchin and Sinema and the whole crowd that did not want to go along with anything like this. Look, one of the problems here is that by caving in to this Republican effort to use the debt ceiling as a hostage-taking operation, it sets the norm for the next time the Republicans will do exactly the same thing, assuming that the Democrats have any power and assuming Democrats are in the White House.
Well, it says we've been through this more than once, and it's just the nature of the way we handle the deficit and handle whether we're going to, each year, going to pay our debts. And it's happened more than once. It will probably happen again, but it's not going to happen at least for another 2 years here. And I don't think beyond that it won't either.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for the U.S. to get rid of the debt limit? That this is, for the reasons you just laid out?
No, I think it would cause more controversy getting rid of the debt limit, although
they care about asserting power, about showing that they have power, about diminishing the Democrats, about demonstrating to the extent that they possibly can that Joe Biden is weak. That's their whole game plan. I mean, they never talked about deficits. They never talked about the debt. As you pointed out, if you look at the Reagan and Bush and Trump tax cuts for the wealthy, primarily for the wealthy and for big corporations. I mean, that's where a lot of today's debt and deficit come from. And you add in military spending, that's it. I mean, this is a charade, and everybody should know it's a charade. I think that the Biden administration's communication strategy also should be called out as pretty awful. Again, the best thing that can be said is that this was not a worse deal, but it's going to be a tough going over the next week to get the 218 votes that Biden needs and that also Kevin McCarthy needs.
It's interesting you pointed out the comm strategy. I've been critical of it too. Defenders of the Biden approach say, no, this is how he negotiates. You stay silent, you do your talking behind the scenes, you get a bipartisan agreement. The problem with that approach, of course, is it misses the big picture. And the big picture is the Republicans are allowed to sell spending cuts as some sort of inherently good economic move. And we have to do this whole charade again in 2025 because we haven't delegitimized the idea of a debt ceiling. There's also, as you say, the charade around debts and deficits. I would point out to you, Bob, in this agreement, this deal cuts back the money that Biden wanted the IRS to spend on chasing tax cheats, money that actually increases tax revenues and decreases the deficit. This deal, the IRS cut part of it, will actually increase the deficit and the debt, ironically.
Absolutely right. In fact, the irony upon irony is that those tax cheats are mostly very wealthy people. So you're going to actually aggravate, exacerbate inequality in this country. You're going to allow the wealthy to get away with cheating on their taxes. They were the ones who were cheating before. That's why the IRS didn't have the resources to go after them. That's why the IRS needed more resources. And at the same time, you're putting extra work requirements on some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Aggravating the central dilemma of our society, which is the widening gap between the very, very rich and the lower middle class, working class, and the poor.
One last question for you, Bob. I don't want to end all on doom and gloom. A lot of progressive, a lot of people on the left say, see, look, Biden, this is who he is. He sold us out. He's not, progressive enough. And yet, to be fair to Joe Biden, he did do a lot of progressive things in his first 2 years in office. We did cut child poverty in half in the first year. The American Rescue Plan was record spending. And there seems to be almost two Biden administrations right now. The first 2 years, it was very progressive. And now this one that is going in for spending cuts and agreeing to Republicans defining the terms of economic debate.
Well, that's true, but also let me end on a very positive note. The environmental, the kind of the climate change provisions that Biden really did put into the Inflation Reduction Act are still there. I mean, they were not touched by this deal, and hopefully, if the deal does hold, and let's hope and pray it does, because the alternative again is Armageddon. Then there is a lot for Biden to crow about.
Yeah, and of course, the spending in the Inflation Reduction Act was described by the Biden administration as the biggest single investment in fighting climate change in American history. So you're right to highlight that that has been protected, and that is an undeniably good thing. Robert Reich, thank you as ever for your time and for your analysis. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Medhi.
Do you think it's time for the U.S. to get rid of the debt limit? That this is, for the reasons you just laid out?
No, I think it would cause more controversy getting rid of the debt limit, although I am exploring the idea that we would, at a later date, a year or two from now, decide whether or not the 14th Amendment, how that actually would impact on whether or not you need to do the debt limit every year. But that's another day.
This is a charade, and everybody should know it's a charade. I think that the Biden administration's communication strategy also should be called out as pretty awful. Again, the best thing that can be said is that this was not a worse deal, but it's going to be a tough going over the next week to get the 218 votes that Biden needs and that also Kevin McCarthy needs.